Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into one of the most fascinating, fiercely debated, and constantly evolving scientific mysteries out there: the true purpose of Stonehenge.
I mean, honestly, have you ever just looked at a picture of Stonehenge and thought, wait, how? Seriously, why on earth did Neolithic humans move 20-ton stones across the rugged terrain of ancient Britain? It's the ultimate 5,000-year-old mystery. We're talking about a time way before wheels, way before metal tools, and yet they managed to pull off this absolute architectural marvel. So why did they do it? Let's figure it out. The staggering reality of this whole undertaking actually begins with an epic origin story. Recent isotope and soil evidence shows us that some of the builders literally migrated from Wales. And get this, they brought their massive stone circle with them. So first they quarried these specific bluestones at Carmgodog and Craig Rose Eflin in Wales. Then they erected an initial circle at a spot called Wan Mon. But here's the kicker. Centuries later, they dismantled the whole thing and moved those exact stones 140 miles away to Salisbury Plain. That is just a massive, mind-boggling, generational commitment. But what exactly were they going through all this trouble to build? Section 1. A giant solar calendar? Decoding the stones as a 365.25-day clock. Let's look at our first major modern theory, recently proposed by archaeologist Timothy Darville. He suggests we need to stop looking at Stonehenge as just a building and start looking at it as a giant, stationary solar calendar. Now take a look at this highly specific number, 365.25. Darville actually anchors his entire theory right around this. He argues that the ancient builders were essentially trying to lock in the exact timing of the solar year, basically creating a calendar in stone that perfectly matches what we know today as the Julian calendar. So the crucial thing here is the actual math built into the structure itself. According to Darville, the 30 upright sarsen stones, those represent the days of a month. Then you've got the 5 central trilithons arranged in that famous horseshoe shape. Those represent the extra 5 days needed to round out a 360-day year to 365. And what about those 4 station stones on the outside? Well, they were supposedly used to track a leap year every 4 years. Combine all that with its perfect alignment with the summer and winter solstices, and hypothetically, it kept ancient festivals perfectly synchronized with the gods. I mean, it sounds like a perfect puzzle coming together, right? Section 2. The calendar theory debunked. The fierce academic friction of archaeoastronomy. Well, yes, but enter the intense and honestly sometimes fierce world of academic archaeoastronomy. Scientists Giulio Magli and Juan Antonio Belmonte recently published a pretty scathing rebuttal, vehemently disagreeing with this whole calendar idea. I want to read you this quote directly from their paper because it perfectly captures how the scientific method works through rigorous peer review and, well, outright opposition. They wrote, "The aim of the present paper is to show that this idea is totally unsubstantiated, being based as it is on a series of forced interpretations and unsupported analogies." Ouch. That is basically academic speak for, you are completely wrong. So let's look at how they systematically dismantled Darville's theory. First off, they point out that assuming 12 months of 30 days is entirely arbitrary, like the number 12 is quite literally missing from the monument's architecture. Second, the whole concept of tracking leap years, that didn't even exist in Egypt until Roman times, which is thousands of years later. But their absolute biggest astronomical point is about the sun itself. The sun's slow movement at the horizon during a solstice makes tracking individual days precisely using giant stones pretty much completely impossible. Because of this, they dismiss the entire calendar theory as numerology rather than actual astronomy. Section 3. City of the Ancestors. The biggest cemetery of the 3rd millennium BC. So if it's not a giant clock, what is it? Well, let's shift our focus from the sky down to the ground. Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson suggests Stonehenge was essentially a city of the ancestors, specifically the biggest cemetery of the 3rd millennium BC. You know, for decades, the cremated human remains found at Stonehenge were kind of overlooked, but recently analyzed cremation archives have revealed a whole lot. Among the grave goods was a rare stone mace head, which is a widely recognized symbol of authority. This tells us a crucial piece of the puzzle. The people buried at Stonehenge weren't just everyday folks. No, this was likely the final resting place for a ruling elite or maybe even an ancient royal family. To truly wrap our heads around Stonehenge, you really have to look at it alongside its neighbor, Woodhenge. Woodhenge and the nearby Durrington walls were made of temporary wood, representing the living, and importantly, they were aligned to the midsummer sunrise. Stonehenge, on the other hand, was made of permanent stone, representing the immortal ancestors, and was aligned to the midwinter sunset. It's a brilliant contrast, temporary wood for the fleeting life of the living, and permanent stone for the eternity of the dead. Just imagine this incredible sensory journey 5,000 years ago. You're part of a massive funerary procession. You start among the living over at Woodhenge. Then, you travel down the River Avon, stopping along the cliffs for intense rituals and giant fires. And finally, right as the sun sets in the dead of winter, you arrive at the imposing stone monument of Stonehenge to deliver the dead. These weren't isolated sites. They operated together as one massive connected ritual landscape.
Section 4, Healing Stones and Acoustics, the Neolithic Lords. But wait, there's actually yet another really compelling angle here. Geoffrey Wainwright and Timothy Darville proposed looking at the physical and sensory experience of being inside the circle. They dubbed it the Neolithic Lords. See, the burials around Stonehenge show unusually high rates of physical trauma and deformity. Furthermore, isotope testing reveals that people were traveling from as far away as the Alps just to get here. Why make that journey? Well, the hypothesis is that those Welsh bluestones we talked about earlier were believed to have magical healing qualities. Sick travelers made these incredibly arduous pilgrimages across Europe hoping for a miraculous cure, which actually draws some really strong parallels to Apollo, the ancient god of both the sun and medicine.
And the experience of being there wasn't just visual, it was profoundly auditory too. Modern acoustic studies, like Rupert Till's really fascinating sound archaeology research, reveal the dynamic sonic properties of these massive stones. The enclosed space actively manipulated sound, boosting speech clarity and creating these super powerful bass responses. When drums were beaten or chants were sung inside that circle, the stones would literally vibrate the air right around you. How wild is that?
What's maybe even more fascinating is that this ancient soundscape wasn't static. As the stone circle was developed and rearranged through different architectural phases over thousands of years, the acoustic effects evolved dramatically. Every single generation that moved a stone or added a new one actively altered the sonic and sensory experience of their rituals. It was a living, breathing space.
Section 5. A multi-purpose monument. The ultimate prehistoric ink blot test. Okay, let's step back for a second and look at the big picture. Who is actually right here? Is it a calendar, a cemetery, a healing center, or an acoustic temple? Well, as the neutral referee in this explainer, I have to tell you, it's likely all of the above. Stonehenge is basically the ultimate prehistoric ink blot test. As Timothy Darville beautifully summarizes it, embedded in Stonehenge is all the bits and pieces that it needs to fulfill all the functions it had. We have to remember that a site over 5,000 years old didn't just do one single thing. It evolved. For one generation, maybe it was a unifying cemetery. For another, a pilgrimage site for healing. And for another, a giant astronomical symbol. It was a monument of unification with tons of overlapping purposes. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. When we look at these massive stones today, does Stonehenge reflect the minds of its ancient builders, or does it reflect the minds of the scientists who study it today? You know, our modern desire is to categorize history into these neat little boxes, calendars, hospitals, graveyards. But perhaps the ancient minds simply didn't separate science, religion, life, and death. Think about that the next time you see a picture of these iconic stones. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it gave you a totally fresh